So, is the soaraway son in any trouble? Probably not, actually. But this gives me an opportunity to explain why that is, and also a little bit about how press regulation works, or doesn't work, depending on your point of view. So, to recap, the Sun published a story, sort of BBC presenter solicits indecent photographs from minor. Lots of speculation in the press, but now what has come out is the person's been identified, his wife's identified him, and it transpires now that arguably this person wasn't underage when the photographs were sent, so therefore there's no offence being committed. I mean, the police seem to have looked into this. So what's going to happen? Well, we've already seen the Sun sort of like backing away a little bit and doing it was in the public interest as to how the BBC handled this. Realistically, there's probably not a lot that could be done to them. I mean, legally, they didn't cross the line into defamation because they didn't identify somebody, and the group of people, BBC presenters, was probably too large. They would argue they're not responsible for everybody speculating on the internet. But, are there any other consequences? Is there a press regulator? Well, sort of. You may recall that after all these sort of previous bouts of hacking, we had what we call the Levinson inquiry, or Levinson 1, because there was meant to be 2 inquiries. And that made certain recommendations about how the press should handle itself. However, the editors just didn't seem to sort of be on board with that. They have now formed something called the Independent Press Standards Organisation. It's a voluntary organisation, and it's basically run by editors of newspapers. Not all newspapers are in it. I don't think the Times is in it. I don't think the Guardian's in it. But Ipso is not Levinson compliant. They didn't adopt the regulations. They said, no, our code of conduct is fine. There is an actually approved regulator called Impress, and that is Levinson compliant. Their code of conduct takes on board everything Levinson said. However, very few national newspapers and indeed regional newspapers have signed up to it. If you actually, it's all things like, local sort of advertisers, the Bath Advertiser and things like that. So realistically, the press police themselves, can they be forced to sort of start complying? Well, one thing is that there is a statute that says that if a newspaper is subscribed to, one of the approved regulators, and like I say, the only one at the moment is Impress, and they follow the code of conduct, that will be reflected in costs if they are involved in illegal proceedings. Effectively, it gives them cost protection. So, if they abide by the code of conduct and they are sued, then even if they lose, they don't necessarily get penalised in costs. It's what's called qualified one-way cost shifting, or I call it QWOCs. Some other people say something a little bit ruder. But yeah, I mean, within that, arguably, what breaches are there even within the existing codes? They can't be done for breaching privacy because they didn't mention this person's name. They didn't. It doesn't appear that they've approached the person. They only, so. They can't be sort of done for intrusive investigations or doorstepping or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, realistically, what might the Sun do? Probably just, get a little bit sort of 1984 and just suddenly that's never happened. And here's our new take on this. And I can give an example here, actually. Some years ago, there was a headline in the Sun it said some very unkind things about, Britain's national treasure, vastly underrated boxer, and I still say best Shakespeare's Juliet, Frank Bruno. And it was a really horrible headline about some struggles he was having, and people did react and said this is completely out of order. The next edition of the newspaper came out with a totally different spin on it, which is, what hero is a great guy, he's battling with this, and we have set up a charity, we're donating X thousand pounds to a charity in his name. That's what they will do. News is a perishable commodity. We all talk about the news cycle. And, something else will come along and this will all be sort of swept under the carpet. I mean, people are already saying, why were we talking about this when there's been like, the NATO summit? And, this was also the day, speaking of press, compliance with orders and legal compliance. This was the day that Boris Johnson was supposed to hand over all his WhatsApp stuff. There's an order of the High Court and he hasn't done it. So is he in contempt? Some people might say that's a much bigger story. But here we are. So yeah, if you're just speculating as to what might happen, my guess is probably nothing.